just, I went a little too far already. Again, this is CDN's 2026 Legislative Preview. Again, I hope to give everyone on this call the opportunity to just get a little taste about what's going to happen in the next 90 days. Session kicked off yesterday. We have lots of really knowledgeable speakers. We will certainly pass along their contact, but I'm going to get out of the way. But thank you all for joining us today. And yeah, with that, let's just move on. So this is just a high-level view of CDN, who we are and what we do. We're here to promote, strengthen, and advocate for community development sector throughout the state of Maryland. And we're Maryland's urban, suburban, and rural communities. There are communities throughout the state of Maryland that need attention, but we're really representing all of those partners, not just Baltimore, not just Montgomery County, but throughout the state. Throughout the session, we hope to give people information related to bills and the budget and the field and practice of community development. And we also have our national partner in Community Opportunity Alliance on the call today. So we'll be getting some updates from Washington as well. The messages for this session for us are: we advocate for strong communities and secure housing, people and places. We're not having CDN Advocacy Day, we're having People and Places Day in Annapolis. And we just really want to lift up the need for what I think about as the housing and. We need vital communities, we need economic development, we need programs and policies that lift all boats. The other thing that CDN has been long focused on is home ownership. So the message: opportunity starts at home, and ownership matters, not just rental housing, but home ownership specifically as well. So we also spend time in the tax sales space, helping people get the supports they need to maintain home ownership. So we'll continue to be talking about those things. So let's get to today's meeting. Just so you have an overview, Dawn Troop is here today from Community Opportunity Alliance, and CCOT from Public Policy Partners, Ben Siegel from the Office of the Comptroller, Danielle Meister from DHCD, Matt Hill from Public Justice will be on, as well as Chuck Cook from DHCD. And they're just going to give, I've given them each some time, and they're just going to give some information about what's going on, what their thoughts are for the next few months, and what their priorities are for the session. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll go straight to Dawn.
Great. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. As Claudia mentioned, I'm at the Community Opportunity Alliance, was the Advocacy Director for the People and Places Collaborative, which is a group that works together to help place-based organizations with an eye at looking at minority-owned, led nonprofits. But overall, the Community Opportunity Alliance works for everyone in the field to ensure that there's building a national-wide, stronger and healthier and more prosperous field by having the cohesion with like the group like yours across the country to elevate these voices on the national level. So I'm glad that there's a lot going on, as Claudia is saying, within your state session as well on the national level. And I was going to kind of jump in on some of the topics that are trending right now. So right now in Congress, there are two bills that are kind of being looked at to answer the supply for, just building homes in general. There's one in the House, which is the Housing Act for 21st Century. And then there's the road bill, which both bills have a lot of attention. And within them, they have both have ways to expand the housing, as in making more of it, but not necessarily all of it is tied to the operation cost, right? So as we are monitoring these bills, we're looking at what it does to the market. And in one, like the House bill kind of changes the speed of production. It changes items in zoning. And it also is one of those things that, what does that mean, it also makes things kind of competitive and high volume of production. So we're kind of looking at that and seeing like, what does that do for community place-based groups? And then with the Senate version of their housing package, obviously it passed in the Senate when it became to the floor to go into appropriations because bipartisan, because every senator had something in it. And within that piece of legislation, it changes kind of like the cycling, right? So it expands CBGG for other groups that partake in the money. It doesn't really and then also you have home in both of these bills. It's more of it again, there's not tons of funding to support the operations, but it adds to supply of building. And we're monitoring to see, personally, not speaking on behalf of the Alliance, I think the Senate bill is one that best fits the field over time. And it gives time to make changes and as things get instituted to wait if there's a change in elections and such things going forward. But, it's one of those we're kind of going through, we're talking with our other national partners. I actually had a conversation with List today to see how they kind of were looking at both these bills. But again, it adds to supply. It assumes that more building faster will fix the problem. But as we all know, that doesn't really help everybody in the production as well as there's other mechanisms that need to happen to help people get into homes to be able to support that. And you can also contact me as we go along and have more information on this because even at the Alliance, we have a policy committee meeting coming up, and it's one of the topics is going through these bills and hearing how your current operation structures are functioning. And if there were changes to certain parts of the bill, what are you seeing right now that hurts the financial bottom line? And we want to be able to sure that we amplify those to our partners as well as to stakeholders on the Hill. The other item that is in these programs are the housing counseling. And this has been a conversation that's been kind of ongoing in Congress about how to make these reforms to housing counseling, and obviously putting a lot of the pressure on the counselor on things that they can and cannot control. We're trying to have more substantive conversations to show that necessarily will not support the outcome of what you're looking for. But I know for a fact, even with conversations with Tim Scott's staffer on housing, they really, for some reason, it was almost as if someone had a bad experience with a housing counselor. Because I'm like, why are these things so specific and so important to you that you think they have to stay, putting a lot of the onus on the housing counselor when some of the things that they have to support people with are out of their control. And also it would make the housing counselor kind of maybe have some trepidation to want to even to then kind of select how they're helping people too, right? So we're trying to look at both the user, the person who's doing the application, and this like the kind of system at large. With another one of the topics we've been tracking and having conversations about during the appropriation season last year, we did have meetings with members of the Labor Age Committee to make sure that the Community Economic Development Program was something that is still going to be funded, and working to see how those things can be leveraged and making sure that OCS within Health and Human Services has that money because it is important, because as government funding is moving in directions that necessarily aren't adding more, it's kind of cutting each year. We want to make sure that every single dollar that is invested in community development is strong. It's not necessarily the headline of conversations within that committee at this moment, so I need to kind of dig down. I have done some research, but obviously right now there's other things going on in the world, but not for me. I meant for like Congress overall. You have the things, foreign affairs have really taken a front seat, but a lot of people see movement on the housing things as it comes up into the spring, late Q1. So a lot of national groups are kind of going into each section of the bill to see what in all things of housing, where we can get as much money as we can for community development. But I will say there is a huge win across the board for rural programs on all of these bills in most ways. So I would say the largest group that probably would be it's a double-edged sword, is rule is in every single kind of package that or conversation within Congress. They have had the rule development is kind of a place where people are looking to invest and put a lot of mechanisms in place to expand, making things more either streamlined or accessible for rural housing. But I will say, as they're doing this, their agencies within the current administration, PAC, another like kind of a large nonprofit organization had put out some stats saying that, the department itself that kind of oversees these programs have had a really large staff cut. And I can share that analysis with you because as you're pushing these things forward, who's going to be implementing them? So it still can cause delays. And that's something I'm kind of interested in looking more into because that came out literally, I think, last week around January, their analysis that they had pulled together about the staffing resources for the rural development programs and wondering how those will affect, because both the housing bills that are kind of up in front have significant large pieces to it. And same thing with the opportunity zones. It's a really large piece of that for rural as well, and compared to kind of housing overall. And I would say that that's a large area that has a lot of developments that they have not seen. So moving along to and back to like kind of HUD and the things that are happening there with the continuum of care. Any questions, by the way? I haven't been looking at the chat. I feel like I'm just kind of like, I hope this is helpful. And again, definitely please feel free. I'll drop my information in the chat so you can reach out if you want more in-depth kind of information versus the high level.
Great job, Dawn. Exactly what we need. I think we're all getting lots of information from lots of areas. So just, trying to sort that out and trying to like, what's going to happen in this area, what's going to happen in that area, and then, deciding like what's real and what's, fake news. And so this is all really helpful. And I don't have any specific questions. I really appreciate you just addressing the things that you just talked about, because I do think that for the greater share of our members, that those are the things they're interested, but others may have questions as well.
Okay, great. And I will take a pop it back and I saw the thing come up in the chat and I'll look at that when I get towards the end so I can maybe kind of put them together if there's more than one or they align together.
I'll monitor the chat for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. So with the continuum of care, there are two lawsuits that are kind of in place. They're all within the same court or the same jurisdiction. Rhode Island is the state that this is coming out of. And let's see, so it has changed because in the late end of December, there was the injunction in place and still HUD had put out a application. However, within it literally said like, even though we've released this, we are not doing anything with it. However, come to January, the court has made decisions where they have them putting out the 2024-2025 application. Now, even though that application, again, it's still kind of in the space of what is the court going to do next as they hear through different things. But even though the application has gone back to a previous year, the funding level, they don't have to fund as they did in that other 24-25. So again, there is some information that literally dropped yesterday on this, and I can kind of, it's really fast turning. So I don't want to like stick to something in the sand and say that's what it is today. But I will say that the current application is now the 24-25 kind of look out, like setup of it, not what they had put out in December. Let's see. And then, and like I want to give a little bit of some things that are coming up, right? And when you think about what you can do and where your voices could be really important and are important as we get closer, like the new numbers for the next fiscal year, that is not even a conversation of topic in DC or with a lot of national groups at this moment. They're kind of thinking about what's going to happen with January 30th, the appropriators. They're still working. There's no appetite right now for a shutdown, even though like there's 4 spending bills kind of left to trug through the grind of the sausage, if you will. They left the hardest ones to get through. However, I will say that is in an election year. They're not trying to cause things that will necessarily affect that, which is not great. You know what I mean? As in the thing is like they should just not want to shut down the government, rather it's election year or not for midterms. Right now, what's left are the biggest ones is defense, labor age, which has the CED program, the THUD, transportation, housing, urban development, and homeland security. Now, there is a conversation within the House to try to break out that homeland bill, because if it is put together in the minibus, which is where there's the omnibus and a minibus. The minibus is like a package of bills of three of all the 12 or however many, you put them together in small chunks. So minibus, they don't want to attach the defense, not the defense, the homeland security, because of the, the killing of the, was Good. I know her last name was Good. I can't think of her. Renee Good in Minnesota, because it really is adding to division within the Democratic rank and file. Like 100 members were not want to have more revisions within that. So and even the chairman is saying that the negotiation is still open to separate that out. So that's a good thing. But also, hopefully, it will have more of a process to get through to the Senate for those bills. I think that's like kind of one of the big things. And right now, they are working. There's some movement on current spending bills that might even pass votes today. They've done some procedural votes. There are bipartisan working relationships. Like a lot of people feel that things should move forward into January, but there are talks of having there's people in the House or members in the House that are kind of like bullish on it, where they're thinking there might be a second reconciliation package. But again, this is an election year, is kind of hard. And the reason why they're talking about that is because of the Affordable Care Act credits. So they realize that there's stuff that came out and there's not a settled kind of what now and what next. So they're trying to push things through reconciliation, but the Senate is tampering that down, saying, hey, you need reasons to use this. You can't just fix what you cost, like this is what you voted, this is what you all kind of pushed through and we had signed back on the July 3rd, right? So that's something we're watching. Don't really see it happening, but there's the Neighborhood Investment Act's tax credit. That's something that the Alliance and also the People and Places Collaborative do support, as it will add to more housing in specifically distressed neighborhoods, as well as you could use it for renovation and restoration. So those are things that we're kind of tracking. And
one thing just popped up in the chat. The Homeownership Opportunity Act is the bill supporting that homeownership development still in play at this point?
Let's see. So if I recall, I might be wrapped into one of the larger. So within the road bill and the housing for the 21st century, they took a bunch of bills from everyone and kind of put it into one large thing. I have not been tracking that personally, but what I can do is see it's more of let's say I just kind of looked it up quickly to see where it may or may not be for tax credits. I'm gonna have to look into that, because that is one bill I have not been tracking, so I can give you that information after.
Yeah, I would just say, I think that homeownership, we have a group of groups working on homeownership. And I would say homeownership, and then there was also like homeownership repairs. So those are the two, kind of things. And I can circle back to you, and then also circle back to the person who asked this question, which is Jesse. So happy to do that.
No, that's great. And I will say the two housing bills have mechanism for repair for sure. And and that's one of the conversations that we're having now, are the two bills that are kind of being introduced in the House and Senate. Do they actually help home ownership, right? And that literally is the conversation that I'm supposed to send in information for like next week is, yes, this adds supply, but what else needs to be in place to ensure that people can have it? And from my initial read, it's one of those things where I really think when I look at those two bills that are kind of coming through, it's about streamlining process. It's not necessarily purposefully thinking how to create the homeownership. So that's my read even before it. And when I was talking earlier with one of a kind of a partner, national group partner, that these are streamlining and process and kind of reducing some red tape, not necessarily pushing how to make that homeownership turn.
I'm I want to get to our other speakers, Dawn, but one quick thing, one last sentence of advice for all of these different groups statewide that are working on advocacy.
Oh, yes. I mean, one of the things is please, when you see something that's actually affecting your day to day, that is one of those things that you think about now is really important. Think about what this looks like in 2 years to 3 years from now. And I understand that's hard when you're working place-based, you have people's lives in front of you and you're pushing every day to get that done. And I think one of the things that is important when you think about advocacy is you want to fight for what, I don't say fight, but you've got the good fight, right? You want to make sure you're speaking about what you see, but you think about the health of your organizations and what you as an org need to ensure that those services are still provided, right? And thinking about what does that look like 2 years from now, or what would I need? Because right now, one of the conversations we're having to support these bills is to look at either do we want to introduce legislation to have more operating funding? Like,
Yes.
Or are we going to push, yeah, no, I know. Like, are we going to push, for earmarks and say like what people can do in their states? So that literally was the conversation I had this morning, was kind of like doing the work you are now, but thinking about what you might need 2 to 3 years from now, so we can get things if we don't have, the houses aren't all Republican or in favor of cutting things back. What could we be in the front of to be able to show and have introduced by a new legislative outlook?
Thank you. Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much, Dawn. I will be in touch about all kinds of things, and I know we're having a policy meeting on the national level, so happy to push those questions, but really appreciate you contributing your time and information today. Okay. With that, we're going to move on to Ann Seacott from Public Policy Partners. Ann Seacott is CDN's lobbyist and has been working with us, God, for 5 or 6 years now, and mentoring me and our members. Really appreciate all the time and work that you've done with us, Ann, and tell us what's on the plate for 2026.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Hi, everybody. It's going to be such an interesting session. So the very overarching issue that's going to be dealt with during this session is the budget. The budget picture is not very rosy, to say the least, with a $1.5 billion deficit. The half glass full view of that is it's half of what it was last year. Unfortunately, it's an election year, and so most of what's going to happen is some as painful as the least possible. Is that the right? It's too many negatives. They're going to try to cut in the least painfully possible ways, but cut things out of the budget and maybe do some fund transfers. So it's going to be very difficult. We will see the governor's budget next Wednesday. Always takes us a little while to figure out what's exactly there and not. But we do know that housing remains a priority for Governor Moore. So we certainly hope to see some good things. I imagine we'll hear later from Danielle and Chuck about some of the departments, housing departments' proposals related to housing. I think that it's a good thing that it continues. It's a good sign, I think, when an issue, whatever the issue is, isn't just a flash in the pan, 1-2 years tops is an issue. This is something clearly this administration continues to value and promote. So I think that it's a good way to finish out this term. The other big news is, of course, we have an entirely different House of Delegates with a new speaker, Jocelyn Pena-Melnick, with the addition of a seventh policy committee in the House, the Government, Labor, and Elections Committee. A lot of new subcommittees. I will tell you, it is absolutely fascinating. All the years I've done this, more than 30, I've never experienced the kind of optimism and positive thinking, positive attitudes, positive, uh, just added everything that I'm hearing from people in the House is their absolute excitement about this new uh, look and feel and functioning of the House of Delegates. It is almost infectious in a good way. And then you step outside the building and you remember, oh yeah, and this other stuff is going on. But it is, I think, very it bodes well for a lot of the issues I think we care about in terms of people and places. And it'll be some folks that have some new subject matter to get to learn in the House, specifically the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee moving into this new moving committees from Environment, Transportation into Economic Matters. And so we're touching base with members of that committee with a new chair of the Appropriations Capital Budget Subcommittee. So there's just a lot of newness that we typically don't see until a new after an election in a new term, the first year of a new term. It's definitely a different feel. There's also a different look to a lot of things at Annapolis. I didn't know until when I walked in the House of Delegates building earlier this week. There's new security system. So anyone coming through in Annapolis, things are just going to look different. It's supposed to make things go faster in the lines getting into the buildings. We shall see. Hopefully it is. But also delegations in the House will all have their meetings virtually. And one of the delegations room is now this new seventh committee's hearing room. And members of the public can once again, as we did pre-COVID, be able to use some of the rooms in the House office building for various gatherings. So it's just a lot of people feeling really good on the House side. The Senate side, it's not that people don't feel good. There's just not all of that same level of optimism. Some folks are a little worried that the new makeup in the Senate is going to create more work for them. I don't know if that will actually happen. But there's been a very small number of changes over in the Senate. So we'll see what the impact of the new leadership in the House and the enthusiasm in the House. We'll see how that impacts both the Senate as well as the governor, and see where things go during these next now 88 and a half days. And then also just wanted to remind people, just on a very practical level, when you are looking at bills and wanting to weigh in on bills, I highly encourage everyone to look on the General Assembly website, look on each of the committee pages. Each committee has guidelines on witness testimony. Please do read them. A reminder that in the Senate, they have a rule that if a bill is a reintroduction, they limit the number of people who can testify on that bill. Generally speaking, there are more limits to people testifying in the Senate than the House. Do take the time to look at those rules before you sign up. And the sign-ups, though, in the House and Senate are the same. For any bill or budget hearing, you need to sign up and or submit written testimony 2 business days before the hearing happens. And there are already some hearings scheduled for next week. And so take a close look if there's anything you're interested in that has a hearing on Tuesday. You must sign up and submit testimony tomorrow. So think we're going to just jump right back into things. And I know that Claudia will probably talk a little bit more also about engaging, especially in the capital budget capital budget hearings. Just to know they're continuing hybrid testimony, meaning people can testify remotely. They highly encourage in-person testimony whenever possible. Folks in person get to testify first before folks who have signed up for virtual can testify. So that is good. And I actually haven't seen yet some of the subcommittee, especially the budget subcommittee rules. But my recollection last year is that not all of the budget subcommittees, maybe none of them, I honestly don't remember, allow any virtual testimony. In the Senate, they might have, but I think in the House they didn't. So just a reminder that we need to remind ourselves of the rules when we're participating in the process. So those are kind of the highlights of things. There's just a lot going on, but lots of opportunity, I think, that come with all the changes. So happy to answer questions.
And I just want to thank you for answering questions that I asked repeatedly. Remind me of this again.
Yep.
I also,
We all need to remind ourselves. We all do.
Yeah. This is a team sport, so also keep in touch with each other, and it really does make a difference. Bills are following bills that may have times that may have changed, bills that may have been amended, things like that. So really appreciate the spirit in which you answer the same question 6 or 7 times. But I think that's the way this work works. So,
yes.
But thank you for all of your hard work for CDN and its members. Really appreciate it. Any questions for Anne? Okay, we're going to move on to Ben Siegel from the Comptroller's Office. Thank you again for being here, Ben. Ben, I honestly had to look up your title. It's Deputy Controller for Policy, Public Works, and Investment, I believe.
Wow, that's very good. You got it.
I was like, what? I don't even remember Ben's title. But thank you so much for being here. And if you could just give us updates from the Comptroller's Office, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much, Claudia. Good afternoon, everyone. As Claudia mentioned, Ben Siegel, Deputy Comptroller for Policy, Public Works, and Investment. It's a mouthful. What does it mean? Just briefly, my division supports the Comptroller on the various boards that she sits on, like Board of Public Works, Pension Board. We also oversee our policy research reports, like the report we recently put out on housing and the economy as part of our State of the Economy series. I also should note that a key point of contact for you, Claudia, and for the network is our Director of Government Affairs, Steve Harrington. Steve's running around this week. He wasn't able to join me on the call today, but I do want to make sure that you guys have Steve's contact info. You can always follow up directly with him on anything relating to session. I think for today, I was just going to try to share some background information with folks that might be helpful as you go into session, as you're thinking about bills. I will note that from the comptroller's perspective, we are not specifically bringing any bills to session this year. Our focus right now is around some major IT modernization projects that will be critical for the state and for our agency in the coming year. Plus, we, for example, right now are migrating our entire tax system to a new cloud-based system called Maryland Tax Connect. We rolled out business taxes in this new platform about 1.5 years ago. This is a big year for us because in the fall, we're going to be moving to personal income taxes as well as pass-through entities. So that means that for not this tax year, but for next year, we'll have a new online platform that folks will be able to use to file state taxes. It's a great system, so it's a lot of work though. So we're focused on that. In addition to that, we are also right now working on a complete revamp of the state's FEMIS system. That's the financial management information system. So that's how all grantees get paid. That's how all state agencies get paid. So that's a big deal for any state grantees as you go through, whether it's DHCD or other agencies. On the back end, it all gets processed through this FEMA system, which is getting an overdue overhaul and upgrade, and hopefully that will make kind of payments and processing be that much more smooth in the coming years. That is kind of big focus this year, to be launched next year. But with that, I thought it would be helpful just to give a little bit of background as you think, especially about the budget. Anne talked a little bit about like the current state of the budget. I'm not going to get into that. That's more of the, jurisdiction of DBM, kind of setting the budget, all of that. But I do want to give a little bit of a primer as you think through things just on the revenue picture in Maryland, because that is something that our agency does through our Bureau of Revenue Estimates. We do the revenue forecasting, which obviously has a really big impact on the expense side, on what the budget can be in order to have a balanced budget. But just to give you a sense, I'm going to use very rough and general numbers here. I'm going to round up and down. But in general, Maryland's operating budget is about $70 billion with a B. The breakdown of our budget on a revenue side is roughly in 4 categories. Our biggest source of revenue comes from our general fund. The general fund is about 40% of our overall revenues, overall budget. It's about $27 billion. The general fund is comprised of what we call the big 3 taxes. So these are the big 3 state taxes: personal income taxes, business corporate income taxes, and sales and use tax. Those are kind of the real drivers of our revenues in the state through the general fund. The second largest pot of revenue coming into the state is through federal funds. So we get about $20 billion a year coming into the state and state government through federal funds. About half of that is Medicaid funding, and that represents about 30% of our revenues. I'm going to circle back to that because obviously right now we are very focused on those federal funds and what's happening in Washington with federal spending and jobs cuts and how that's affecting our overall budget in Maryland. And then the other 2 categories, each of which are at about 15%, are special funds. So we have a number of special funds, some of which get funded through diversions of funding from the general fund, like diversions of corporate income tax or personal income tax. And then finally, we have other revenue sources from higher education, transportation funds. And so both of those are roughly 15% of our overall revenue picture. So that's kind of the overall picture. In terms of our revenue forecasting, this is the work that our Bureau of Revenue Estimates does. They do the forecasting for the general fund only. So note that that's about 40% of our overall budget, about 27%. About $27 billion. I'll just kind of give a quick snapshot. The Bureau of Revenue Estimates meets 3 times a year. Their last meeting was in December, and we kind of wrote down revenue slightly, in part because some of the impacts in the federal government, but in general, our forecast is on track, and we are expecting for FY26 about a 4% growth in our general fund. Now, we are expecting a smaller growth, and that 4% growth is pretty much on line with kind of recent years as well as pre-pandemic growth. We saw a huge growth in our general fund revenues during the pandemic, in part through a lot of the federal stimulus, and then it dipped down right after the pandemic, and then it's leveled back up in FY25, 26. We are expecting slower growth, though, for FY26. 2027, only about 2%. A lot of which is folks probably saw the recent jobs numbers that so far for 2025 through November, January through November, Maryland lost about 25,000 federal jobs. So it's obviously a big deal. It has a big impact. Now, interestingly, we've yet to see the impact of those federal job losses in our withholding tax revenues. Part of that's a delay issue, right? When people were laid off to when they actually left their job, or if they had a severance or the fork in the road, folks. But and also people getting new jobs. But that's something that we're going to need to be tracking closely in 2026, kind of that relationship between the federal job cuts and the impact on our withholding tax revenue. I did just want to note, and I'm going to put in the chat here, on the federal government side, we've been tracking this very closely within our office. We've developed a partnership last year with the Smith School of Business at University of Maryland. We put out a report last June that looked at kind of the baseline spending by the federal government in Maryland in terms of jobs, contracts, grants, and direct payments. And kind of the Trump 2.0 cuts, Maryland would receive, the state, not just state government, but all money coming into Maryland was about $150 billion a year. And that's across wages for both employee wages, but also retirement income, contracts for work performed in Maryland, grants, and direct payments. And so we are closely tracking just kind of how expected cuts at different agencies will impact Maryland. And so we put out a report in June that looked at kind of that baseline data. And then just this week, we put out a second report that looks at the effects of some scenarios. So, for example, with the dismantling of USAID, how is that impacting Maryland? And while USAID doesn't have any offices, or didn't have any offices located in Maryland, an estimated 1,200 Marylanders were directly employed by USAID. So that's a big deal. So what the tool allows folks to do is kind of look at those scenarios, and you can look at kind of county level data. So obviously for Montgomery County, Prince George's County, to a certain extent, Anne Arundel, Howard, Frederick, kind of the counties that are more reliant on federal government. You can see the breakdown at the county level. As part of that report, we put out this dashboard that kind of allows users to go in and actually kind of, select different agencies and look at different scenarios. We'd be happy to kind of do follow-up. I was just looking at our dashboard this morning with the announcements yesterday about all the cuts at SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health at HHS. And, Maryland receives a couple $100 million in grants through, nonprofits, other organizations in those grants per year. So while that doesn't affect the state budget directly, that does affect the budget of many nonprofits and other organizations. And then finally, so we're happy, and Claudia, if folks are interested in learning more about this tool and playing around with it, we can do follow-ups, we can do demos and all of that. Again, it's intended to be kind of a resource for especially state, local government as we're doing planning, as we think ahead to kind of how cuts will impact Maryland. But it's also something that nonprofits, that grantees, that federal contractors might be interested in as well. The final point I'll just mention, as it relates to legislation in session, while we don't have any bills ourselves, we obviously get very involved. We do a lot of the fiscal note work on bills. We are obviously tracking a lot of what's happening. I mean, we're certainly excited about some of the bills that DHCD is bringing. A lot of those ideas came from a lot of the work, obviously, they've done in the housing report that we put out last year. I think a lot of the findings kind of helped inform some of those ideas. So that's something that we're looking at closely. I'll also note just another thing is that we tend to pay very close attention to the implementation of legislation, especially as it relates to budget or taxes. So we do know that there's some bills that are being floated around tax credit changes. There's an interesting bill around the catalytic revitalization tax credit, and making some changes to eligible uses of that tax credit. I know that there's some bills, I think, floating around on the historic preservation tax credits. These are obviously of interest to this group. And so for us, it's a matter of, how can we from the comptroller side be in the best position to process these tax credits when the certifications for the credits come in from whether it's DHCD or Commerce or Maryland Historic Trust. So those are things that we look at closely. And I would just say, as you guys think about, those types of tax credits or other programs, just always feel free to reach out to us, because a lot of it does come down to how will these things be implemented to make them kind of easy to access and easy to use. So with that, happy to answer any questions. And again, I'll put my contact information in the chat, and more than happy to follow up with folks.
Thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate also just the high level where we are. So that's great. And I will certainly connect again with you as well. I'm going to keep moving. Danielle Meister is here from the Department of Housing and Community Development. Danielle, if you can give us your updates, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Sure. Well, I thought Dawn did a really great job just the actual chaos that we've been going through the last few months with the Continuum of Care NOFO. So I won't get into a whole lot of details about what happened and where we are now. The summary that she gave was perfect. What I will share is what have we been doing at DHCD and specifically in Maryland in our responses. So one is that the Maryland OAG was part of the multi-state coalition that filed litigation against HUD related to the COC NOFO. It was one of 2 court cases. So we're really proud of the work that happened. We partnered very closely with the OAG to articulate what would the impact have been to Maryland. And just to give folks a sense, if you hadn't seen our prior briefings in other spaces, if the HUD policy changes had gone through, it would have meant over 2,400 households would lose their housing, mostly permanent supportive housing, and it would have meant a $46 million cut to housing assistance in Maryland alone. And we have regional and local breakdowns if anyone's interested. But obviously, this would have been a really transformative threat to the entire ecosystem of services, and really would have had an incredibly detrimental impact and dangerous impact on the lives of a lot of people we serve. So we're really happy and thrilled that where we are now, it seems to be the current year grants are going to be renewed. Right now, we're supporting all the local continuums of care in submitting their applications and making sure that they all align with HUD expectations. But generally, right now, it seems like most communities are going to take advantage of the automatic renewal option that HUD has included in the NOFO. Most communities are not going to be requesting reallocations of projects to be able to simplify the process and ensure the awards get out faster. The other kind of second challenge that we were facing, there's this policy issue of changing funding priorities, changing what would be eligible. But the secondary issue we were struggling with was the timing. This was an extremely late process. HUD normally sends out a NOFO in June, and we submit applications in response by September or October, and awards are announced by January. And it's already a very tight timeline. It already, we already have programs that their grants will expire before HUD grants are announced every year. That's in the best of times. This NOFO was released 5-6 months later than normal, and HUD was very specific that they didn't intend to announce any awards until at least May. And so that would have meant that in Maryland, we would have had about 25% of our continuum of care portfolio operating unfunded at some point between now and July 1st. So there's a really severe need for bridge funding. Some of that has since changed. HUD is now committing, and they've filed with the court that they do intend to announce awards by the end of March. But we do anticipate it's going to take HUD several months to execute grant agreements. So there's still going to be a lot of projects that have funding gaps. And when we say funding gaps, we don't mean, they're going to be able to cut back on services temporarily. For most programs, it means they can't pay rent for their clients. They can't make payroll for the case management staff that serve those clients. So these are really vital services that cannot suffer a gap. So one of the additional things that we're working on, we've been partnering with philanthropy to figure out if we can pull some sort of emergency bridge funding plan together. If we can create a statewide fund that could provide temporary relief to these agencies who have early start dates and are impacted by a late awards process. If we're successful in getting funding to the table for that, the way it would work is organizations would receive funding, and it would be contingent on a eventual HUD award. If that HUD award comes through, then the funds would need to be repaid back into the fund so we can be prudent with fiscal resources. And if not, then they would be able to keep the fund. So right now we're exploring all the different options that are out there to figure out how we can make that a reality, and also gauge who really needs those interventions. Not every project needs that kind of assistance. So that's the second lane that we're working on. And then the other piece that's going to come up is our court case isn't over. So we are still waiting for a summary judgment that's expected to come hopefully in February. Just last night, they were filing new documents. So speaking to Dawn of things are still happening, I was getting alerts at midnight of new court filings being posted, motions for summary judgment. So we're hoping that in February, we will start to see the court issue a summary judgment. It's anticipated that that summary judgment will really guide what happens next with the COC program and what might occur in a future cycle. So the preliminary injunction was largely about stopping the damage right now. It was not necessarily a declaration about the policy changes HUD was trying to make. A lot of the arguments for the preliminary injunction were more about timing of awards and the disruption of continuity of care. So as we look at the summary judgment, one of the things that we hope the court will do is rule in favor of some of the arguments that the plaintiffs have made in the two cases, that the policy changes HUD is endeavoring to make conflict with statute, conflict with regulation, and conflict with best practices. So we are eagerly awaiting that. We do expect HUD to release a NOFO for this year in June or July. And we do expect that they will try to introduce the same exact requirements. So while we in the homeless world are all feeling a lot of relief because we've gotten through this immediate hurdle, we are not out of the woods yet, and we are continuing to plan as if these are going to come back, and they're going to come back soon. Contingency planning, we're starting to think about alternative funding sources. We're starting to look at if we do have an opportunity to apply for new types of housing, what would we want to make, and what would fit within the boundaries that HUD is looking at. And so we'll learn a lot more over the next couple months, but we are very cautiously optimistic that these renewals are going to come through and we won't have a gap in services. So that's been the big pressure on the HUD side. We also have been really busy and active with two new programs that are state funded over the last 6 months that I wanted to highlight because they'll likely get some attention during session. One is the Community Schools Rental Assistance Program. It was established 2 years ago in statute, and it was allocated $5 million in fiscal year 25, $5 million in fiscal year 26. And then there's a third source of revenue that we are still waiting to get appropriated, which is judiciary revenue from eviction filing fees. So we're in the process now of having those funds transferred to DHCD so we can start to use those. But in this first initial year, we awarded out $10 million to organizations that operated programs in 8 counties. We used a formula, data-driven method to award funds and decide which jurisdictions we were going to operate the program in. And we launched applications towards the end of October. It was a slightly staggered timeline by each county, but over the course of 2 weeks, every application opened. They were open for about 8 weeks. And over the course of those 8 weeks, we received 4,500 applications totaling over $31 million worth of requests for assistance. So because the need and the demand really far outpaced the available resources, we sat down with our grantees and talked about what would be the best strategy to serve families. Ultimately, we landed on closing those application portals to new applications so that families would not get false hope about resources that might not be available. But we had each county established either a waiting list or an interest list. So that way, if new resources did become available, we would be able to contact those individuals and make them aware of any new resources. So we're really proud of the work that we've done. We worked really closely with MSDE and the Governor's Office for Children and rolling that out. Took a very different lens to program design because this is a program that exclusively serves families enrolled in community schools. And so we did targeted enrollment outreach campaigns at the school level. And just a couple of insights I would say that are early from the program. We don't have all the data in yet on the participants who benefited, but the vast majority met sort of the typical profile for who gets evicted, which is really great. That's exactly who we wanted to serve. We wanted to make sure assistance got to the people who are most disparately impacted by eviction. So the majority of households that received assistance so far, based on our sample data, which is heavily influenced by location. So we have Baltimore County, Wacomico, and Washington so far. So within those 3 counties, we had over 70% of households were Black households. The vast majority were headed by a female head of household. And the average rent debt was about $4,000. We typically provided about 5 months worth of assistance. So we're not talking about massive rent balances. These are really families who seem to be, struggling for several months and trying to get back on their feet. And so it's been interesting to look at the data coming through and compare how it worked to the Treasury program, for instance, and the needs that we saw there. But some of the insight we've gotten from our partners is that a lot of the families who applied to this program are families who have never interacted with the local homeless system or eviction prevention system before. So they were sharing with us that a lot of the families they were seeing, had never reached out about homeless prevention, had never applied for, shelter or anything like that. So this program and the way that we deployed outreach to families and brought services to families in a school setting seems to have really reached a new population that always had the need, but maybe just wasn't plugged into our traditional network of supportive services. So there's some early learnings that we have. We're hoping to publish a report sometime in March that includes all of the data for the full $10 million that we allocated in this first year. And then we will be seeing what the budget includes for fiscal year 27 before we make any decisions about which jurisdictions will be in a year 2 or how much we might allocate. I know advocates have shared with us that they are advocating for $25 million for the program. If the program's level funded to this past year, we would have 5 million. So one thing that I've been encouraging folks to understand is, this first year we deployed 10 million in one go. Technically, we're already facing a cut because level funding is 5 million. So we are going to be looking at what makes sense in terms of grants and allocations once the budget gets to a final state in April. Then we'll do another summer RFP to select grantees for the following year. So I think it's been highly successful. The demand, even though we knew it'd be high demand, I think it exceeded our expectations to get that many applications and $31 million of requests in just 8 weeks. And that actually, I looked back at our ERAP data from the early days of Treasury funding and COVID, and that demand actually exceeds what we saw during COVID in terms of timing. And so I think a lot of that has to do with how we rolled it out and how intentionally we reached out to families rather than expecting them to find us through like a press release. So lots of great lessons learned. We're continuing to work with partners and we'll be starting to plan for year 2 here shortly. The other thing is I just want to highlight is our Office of Tenant and Landlord Affairs is fully operational. We have had a full team for several months now, and During this past year, we published the state's first tenant bill of rights, and subsequently released a second version of that to align with new laws that went into effect this year. So that is something that's required to be posted as part of every lease when it's issued by a landlord. But we also have it available on our website. We have been working really closely with legal services, local community partners, sheriff offices. We've been working with realtors and landlords to get the word out over the last 6 months. And then looking forward, as new tenant legislation gets passed, we'll incorporate those new measures into the Tenant Bill of Rights. And we are also increasingly, having interactions with tenant organizers and learning about the work that they're doing. And we are also learning about the enforcement work that happens at OAG and MCCR with fair housing. So lots of really great work this first 6 months, but we're looking forward to year 2. And that office was created through legislation that advocates fought for. So we're really appreciative to have this office and this resource, and thrilled to have a full team. But happy to answer any questions folks have. If there's anything I didn't cover that you're interested in, would be happy to share about that too.
Great. Thank you so much, Danielle. I will certainly be in touch with you. I have lots of key points that I'd love to discuss. It may wait until after, some of it may have to wait until after session, but thank you so much for coming today and being such a great partner with CDN.
Always.
I'm going to move on to Matt Hill. And just, Matt, if you could talk about the Renters United Maryland's agenda and the work also that may benefit this group here.
Great. Thank you, Claudia. And thanks to Danielle for that great presentation, particularly on the community schools rental assistance program, because that is one of Renters United Maryland's priorities. And now I don't have to talk about it, which is fantastic, because I do, because we do have an advocacy ask on that, but I should back up. So Matt Hill, he, him, Public Justice Center, which is a member of Renters United Maryland, our state's statewide coalition of renters, organizers, advocates, attorneys. CDN is a member of RUM, and excited to talk with y'all today. I do have a quick one-pager. If I don't know if share screen's available, I can send a request. All right, sending a request. Oh, there we go. Thank you. This is our just one pager on our priorities for the year. And we, of course, support all the efforts to create more affordable housing. But we've been talking internally quite a bit with our coalition members and colleagues to make sure that renters actually have a voice in their housing and have stability in their housing, particularly if the government's making these kinds of investments in housing. So our first priority has been our priority for the last couple of years, and it is local enabling legislation for a good cause eviction. This would mean that the landlord would have to disclose the reason for non-renewing a lease, and needs to be on the list of acceptable reasons. Now, most of you all who are in the affordable housing development and management space are already governed by some version of good cause eviction, usually from federal law. And so, this is a standard practice in many contexts for the 210,000 units already governed by affordable restrictions in Maryland, and by the 5 or 6 other states and 20 some odd jurisdictions that have already done this. This is just to let Maryland counties pass good cause eviction if they want to. Right now, under current law, they cannot. Right now, there are roughly 5,000 families that are evicted each year without providing a reason. You may know this legislation passed in the House in 2024, and we've been active in the Senate, trying to get it out in the Senate and continue to have discussions, particularly with Chair Will Smith, around this. And I could go a very long time about some of the dynamics there, but I know I have very limited time. So I will stop there on good cause for the moment, but would love to continue to have any support from CDN members on that. We've talked about the Community Schools Rental Assistance Program, ensuring housing applications for rental housing are treated fairly. So this will be a suite of 3 bills First is the Fair Chance in Housing Act. And this is particularly important because of what the Trump administration has done. So there used to be some HUD, DOJ guidance around when and how landlords could consider criminal records in assessing housing applications. And the gist of it was, don't do that. Don't do that in a way that's going to have a discriminatory impact, particularly on Black folks, because we know how the criminal justice system has been weaponized against Black folks for very many years. And so that now is being revoked or has been revoked. And so now there is no guidance at all around how criminal records can or should not be used. And the Fair Chance in Housing Act would fill that vacuum and make sure that there's a little more fairness and a little more equity in how criminal records are assessed. The Discrimination Against Voucher Holders Using Credit Income Test Act. We've changed that name. That just came out. I forget. It's like the Ending Credit Barriers Test Act. But this is for essentially for voucher holders. And you'll see, the state passed the Home Act to stop discrimination against voucher holders. But some very clever, landlords are saying, well, you got to have income that's 3 times the rent, the full market rent, not just the voucher holders portion. And we think that's already illegal under the Fair Housing Act, but this would clarify that it's just point blank, no question, illegal. And then there's also a question about using credit scores for voucher holders, right? So a lot of times folks with vouchers or other subsidies don't have the best credit scores, oftentimes because before they got the subsidy, they couldn't afford the basics of life. And so their credit is not so good. But once they had the voucher, that kind of past credit score is just irrelevant. And so right now, that kind of discrimination is keeping voucher holders out of all areas of Maryland. And this bill would essentially make sure that the Home Act actually has some teeth and that voucher holders are actually considered throughout Maryland for housing that's within their payment standard. Finally, the Tenant Screening Transparency Act is, in a nutshell, it's going to say, look, if you're going to deny somebody a rental application, you need to provide them a copy of tell them why and provide them a copy of the grounds for denial. First, to make sure that it was correct, right? Because credit scores, not always correct. Rental histories, not always correct. And again, we have this concept in credit and denying people for credit, and it should extend to rental history. Finally, number 4, there is a pretty concerted effort by Sinclair Media and right-wing think tanks to convince everyone on this call that the biggest problem facing Maryland families today seeking housing is squatters. And yes, squatting does happen, and it's not good. It's not good for anybody. More often in our practice, we see a lot of rental housing scams. So somebody finds a place through Facebook Marketplace, they pay their $5,000, they get the keys, and then they're told a week later, oh, wait a second, I didn't, that person who rented it to you wasn't really the owner. But the consequence of this narrative from the right-wing media is now a number of bills last year to try to strip out all the due process, to evict people first and ask those questions later. And a bill did pass last year that shortens the period of time from filing a complaint to trial for someone who's allegedly a squatter to 10 days. And that just took effect October 1st. And we don't really have any data on how that's working or not working. But the narrative hasn't let up. There have been 16 news stories about this issue in Maryland in 2025 alone. And so we've already seen at least one bill that's been introduced that would shorten this time period even further. We expect other bills to be introduced along these lines. And so we're very concerned about that, and we'll be trying to oppose anything that tries to take the due process out of the eviction. So I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions. Also happy if you're interested in joining. We have an actions alerts. You can join a committee that's working on any of those 4 priorities. And happy to discuss further.
Thank you, Matt. That's great. I really appreciate you raising these issues up. I have discussed with others. I also look forward to the time where we're trying to figure out how we drive down the number of evictions in the state of Maryland and how we get more affordable housing. So there are fewer squatters overall because those people need housing overall, right? So, but I will certainly be in touch and continue to collaborate with Renters United Maryland. I'm going to roll to Chuck Cook right now to present DHCD's legislative priorities. And yes, I look forward to continued work with all of you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Claudia. I appreciate it. If you will hold on 1 second, I will pull up.
Yeah, and yeah, you can certainly share if you want to share your screen or slides. And most of you know Chuck Cook is the Chief Legislative Officer for the Department of Housing and Community Development. I think most people in this group have met Chuck in person or seen him present before, but happy to have you talk a little bit about the department's agenda and the things that you're working on.
Thank you. Yes. So unlike past sessions where we've had sometimes up to 15 bills, thankfully we've decided to pare that down to 3. So and we're seeing much more focus, particularly on housing production at this point in time. So I want to share my screen over here and talk about our 2 priority bills. The first of which is a privately sponsored bill, the Maryland Housing Certainty Act, sponsored by Senator Augustine and Delegate Baylor. And there is one portion here that no longer applies, but we'll cover it. Fundamentally, what this bill does is it creates an early vesting regime under the state of Maryland, which is to say, quickest way to understand it is once we've all agreed to the rules, we stick with the rules until the entire project is built. So in Maryland right now, you can put in an application, start going through the permitting process, spend years developing a housing project, only to have someone come by later and either downzone the property or change the setbacks or put parking requirements on there that didn't exist that are different from the master plan or a planning document that was originally done. What this bill says is once we put in a completed application, we've looked at the land and said, hey, we're checking off all the boxes. This is how you've planned for it. We're going to build something that fits the planning of the property as it exists now. You are then vested. And so rules cannot change. You lock in those local land use regulations at the time of a completed application, and you have that vestment for 5 years, right? If it's a multi-phased development, then the vesting only applies to the individual phase that you're in, and you have to come back and reapply to make it a little bit easier so you're not vested all the way through. So fundamentally, what the bill says is when we agree upon the rules at the beginning, those rules cannot change throughout the process. That's the way to kind of invest in it. It does have 2 other bullet points. We have removed this part. Originally, as it was drafted, we had a section there about authorizing third-party permitting. And in conversations with our local government partners, it's just not something that is easy to implement without additional resources. We understand those concerns. We're not trying to do anything that would add additional weight to the shoulders of the folks that are trying to do this work. Our intent with third-party permitting it was literally to remove some of that burden off of the shoulders of local government. And we found that through those conversations, it's actually increasing that workload and something we don't want to do. So we have deleted this section of it here from the bill. The sponsors have agreed, I should say, to delete that section. So we're getting ready to file that legislation. It does have a deferral of the collection of mandatory impact fees in the bill. So the best way to think about this is you have an education impact fee, you have a public safety impact fee. We know that once you build a property, you're going to have children there. It could impact, the schools in the surrounding area. We know that it could potentially impact public safety and the increase in police officers, firemen, EMS, EMTs. So what if instead of paying that big lump of cash at the very beginning of the process, you paid it at the very end, right before you received the use and occupancy license for the property? So instead of, waiting until after it's complete and then trying to chase them down for money, it is contingent. You have to pay these impact fees. It's contingent upon getting your use and occupancy license. And the reason why we're putting this in the bill is because in a lot of times a property development can take sometimes up to 5 years to get done through all the permitting and through the construction itself and financing. And you may actually have to finance all of those fees at the very beginning. So you're paying impact fees, and then you're paying interest on those impact fees for years. So trying to create more affordability in housing, that extra interest that you're paying on impact fees is just going to be added as a price point per unit to the property that's being built. So if we put it near the end, the municipality or the county still gets the money that they need. We're not against impact fees. Development should pay for development. It's just where it is in the staging of it, where it's closer to the end and you're not paying additional money on top of it. I think it's important. So that's the Maryland Housing Certainty Act. It is bullet points 1 and 3 with the deletion of bullet point. And I've talked to our sponsors today. They are currently collecting co-sponsors before dropping it in the hopper and submitting it sometime next week. The Starter and Silver Homes Act of 2026 is ours. That is a departmental bill being run by DHCD. And that actually already has a number. It is SB 36 and HB 239. And what it does, we're looking at a problem of affordability in the state of Maryland, right? You guys have heard me talk multiple times about the fact that our largest outmigration, 2/3 of it in 2024. So 2/3 of everyone who left were between the ages of 17 and 34 years old. So we're not talking about folks that are snowbirds moving south, right? That are moving to Florida to escape the cold. We're not talking about working class people in their 40s and 50s. We are talking about the folks that we freshly come out of school, look around and say, I can't afford to live here and move to another state. So it's very telling to us that affordability issue, first-time home buyers, for folks fresh into the workspace, don't have the ability to buy. At the other end of that, the Silver Homes area is folks that look like me, where I've got a 24-year-old out of the house. I have 2 teenagers that are getting ready to leave my house, and I would like to downsize from our 4-bedroom home in Crofton to something that is more manageable for my wife and I in a couple of years. Will that product exist for a price that we can afford? I don't know. Right now, it doesn't. So if you're looking at both ends of your career spectrum, both your starter and your silver folks, they need homes that work in a smaller product that is more naturally affordable because of its size. So what does that mean? We're looking at the prohibition from enacting or enforcing requirements for minimum lot sizes greater than 5,000 square feet in areas served by municipal water and sewer. The italicized there, not intended to impact conserved land. We actually go through the bill and talk about the areas that are conserved that would be off limits to this, right? But the intent here is where you can handle this with water and sewer. We don't want to build this on greenfield where we're creating more septics, right? But where you can handle this on water and sewer, we shouldn't have minimum lot sizes any larger than 5,000 square feet. We should have the ability to build those smaller homes on smaller lot sizes. Prohibiting local jurisdictions from enacting or enforcing minimum dimension, square footage, or lot coverage, right? So you have to have a minimum dimension level. No, we should be able to build the product that we can on the space that we have. Or square footage. It's got to be 2,500 square feet, right? In the last 40 years, we have prioritized quarter-acre lots with McMansions. What if we change that instead and prioritize smaller homes and smaller neighborhoods and more densely built neighborhoods, right? Prohibiting local jurisdictions from enacting or enforcing minimum setbacks greater than 5 feet on the sides or 10 feet for front and backyards. So what are we doing here? You guys have been through countless neighborhoods where you've got a 25 to 40-foot setback and a garage way back on the front yard, because that's a requirement that has to be done that way. And that's so much more extra space. What if, again, all of the little lovable places we love in the state of Maryland and walkable towns, if you're in downtown Berlin, if you're in Annapolis, what if those setbacks were much smaller and you're much closer to the street? You have a much more walkable neighborhood, right? So we want to be able to do this throughout the state to allow to re-legalize, I should say, to re-legalize these smaller lot sizes and houses that are allowed to be closer together without impacting, obviously, public safety. We need to make sure, firefighters and folks can get around it and operate. But at the same time, we don't need these humongous spaces. And what if we found a way to create these smaller lots and smaller products to serve those purposes? Allowing the construction and placement of townhomes. Important to note, we are changing this so that it is allowing the construction and placement of townhomes in areas served by public and water and sewer, specifically because where you're trying to serve it on septic and well, it's not going to work for townhome construction. And then simplifying and streamlining the process of splitting larger lots into smaller lots so that you can actually get down to these 5,000 square foot areas served by water and sewer. So that's a lot in the Starter and Sober Homes Act, and there's a lot of stuff we've been talking about with local government to kind of get around a lot of objections or to find those places where we agree upon. And so, for instance, the construction and placement of townhomes and the addition of saying, hey, that needs to be where there's public water and sewer is through conversation with local planners and planning and housing professionals in counties and municipalities. So that's the Starter and Sober Homes Act of 2026. And again, is SB 36, HB 239, because it was pre-filed as a departmental. And then last but not least is a neighborhood business development program. Has to do with one of our programs internally and how we do business lending. Not that big of a housing issue necessarily, but it is a cleanup to that program, which would be our third one, to allow us to get money out the door quicker to small businesses in Maryland's main streets, to be able to get money on the streets and build more economic development with this. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. See if anybody has any questions about these bills. I know I've talked to a lot of you guys about it. Some of you I haven't. I did want to note that I see Sarah Redinger's name on here. I know Habitat's a huge fan of Starter and Sober Homes. Our realtors obviously are. Builders that can build smaller homes are too. Yep, there it is, the heart that I love to see on this one. Travis, I see your hand up. You got a question?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. I thought I had seen earlier that one of the bills was going to be like sort of a TOD thing, like a transit-oriented development thing. Am I mistaken,
Yes.
or did that get taken out?
Nope, you're correct. So I didn't cover that bill because that MDOT is actually leading the charge on that.
Okay.
We are second seat to them. That's the gubernatorial housing bill, right? So
okay,
the
gotcha.
So the transit-oriented design is being carried by the governor. We are helpful in that process, helpful in drafting all of that. But that's MDOT's time to shine, and I don't want to take anything away from one of my sister agencies on that.
Yeah,
But yes, that is the lead housing bill for the state of Maryland this year from the governor's office.
Okay.
Followed by starter homes, and then of course followed by the Housing Certainty Act by our private sponsors. Those three are the three bills. Any other questions for?
Yeah, and I'm happy to share context with you, Travis, on the transportation bill from the transportation department, and just like the skinny on that. Happy to do that. It's they're kind of not usually in our lane, but in this case they are, and we will, certainly I will have it on my list of bills and things like that, because it is something that is really important to our members.
Yeah, it's the first time that MDOT's led on a housing bill, which is fun for. I love working with those guys. We actually do a weekly call in, check in on all three bills together. They're great to work with. If you are familiar with the TOD bill at all, it is very similar to what they tried to get done last year, but were unfortunately unsuccessful, with a few changes to it as well. So, if you're not already in contact with them, but it sounds like you are, I can send you information specifically on the TOD bill. I just didn't bring it up on this call because I'm not the expert to talk about it, so I just didn't want to jump in the area where I'm not as well versed or could answer as many questions as, say, my friend Matt Michler and those folks.
Yeah, but Travis, I mean, that just, one of the easy things I can do is just invite them to a public policy meeting, just to talk about that bill. And, it probably has a number. We're all drinking out of the proverbial fire hose. So there's some things that I haven't looked up and haven't looked at. But yeah, I will I'll make sure to certainly share that as part of that, and share the contact of people.
And they've been, and Claudia, just on that point on having a number, they have been developing it up to the wire. So I think it's been submitted to drafting, but it hasn't come out the other end.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's true. So I have like 2 minutes to kind of wrap this up, but I really appreciate Chuck, really appreciate the collaboration. We'll continue to call. I'm just going to go through a few things that CDN has going on. I'm going to go back to my shared screen here with everyone. Just to wrap things up, I do want to also just like, what are we doing? How's this going to work? So we have our CDN public policy meetings Mondays from 11:30 to 12, where we go through bill tracking and the bills that we're following. We are having our CDN Advocacy Day is Tuesday, March 3rd at 9 a.m. That is usually our day. In past years, we have collaborated to have a housing day in Annapolis, but we are doing something a little different this year by having a People and Places Day. There's a lot of need for us to really raise up community economic development. Dawn also, when she led off this call talking about the federal focus, there's a lot of focus on rural communities. We've got to make sure that we are lifting up a larger message around economic development that is urban, suburban, and rural. So I hope to have lots of rural participation and really be talking about people and places and the work, the amazing work that our members are doing statewide. We are also going to be participating. We are the state lead partner for the National Low Income Housing Capitol Hill Day on Friday, March 13th. I encourage folks to participate on that. I still am always amazed at the number of people who haven't been to Capitol Hill, but please participate. It is one day. Yep, it is during session, but now we've had, I don't know, a 200% increase in the number of people who participate. There's no longer more people from Indiana and New Jersey than there were from Maryland, as there had been in the past. So I'm very happy about that and very proud of the work that the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition and CDN and other agencies have done to make that happen. Please pay your membership dues. Yes, we're a membership organization. We're an advocacy organization. And almost every application these days says, we fund everything but advocacy. So I just can't emphasize that enough. And let me just say, I also push back on people all the time. When they complain about NIMBY organizations, I'm like, so what are you doing? How much have you contributed to organizations who are doing advocacy on the other side? Maybe it's zero. Well, I bet the NIMBY organizations have actually contributed. Yeah, that's the way it works. And that's why we are where we are. Budget hearings. The dates for budget hearings are already out. Thank you, Chuck, for collaborating with CDN and giving us these dates really far in advance. The budget hearing is actually, the Senate budget hearing is the same day as our advocacy day, so it should work out. If you'd like to also testify on the budget, it should work out that you can participate in advocacy day and also participate in the Senate budget hearing. So that would be fantastic. It's so important for us to say thank you for the capital budget funds that projects have gotten throughout the state, and to acknowledge that to members of the Maryland General Assembly. And then also the operating budget is also critical. We need more operating dollars in order to complete those capital projects. People need to hear from people within their districts about what the money is actually doing throughout the DHCD budget. So just want to highlight that. Upcoming legislative session is from January 15th to April 13th. I think most people on this call know that. Pre-filed bills, that was there from before. If you haven't seen, lots of bills coming out now. The budget drops, I said January 20th, but actually I think it's going to be January 19th this year. But just, when we get it, we'll certainly include it in all of our materials. And we always do some budget recommendations there. So that's a really key piece for CDN. There's a lot of changes in the House of Delegates. This article that I highlighted, hyperlinked here to this presentation, is just a Maryland Matters article about the changes in the House of Delegates. But please review the committees. It's not clear. There's a lot of new subcommittees. One person said to me, God, they don't make this easy. Nope, no, they don't. So just, make sure you look at economic matters, look at the subcommittees, look at the budget subcommittees again and again, because there's a lot of moving around in the House. Then I also included this in my presentation because there's a lot of questions about policies, recommendation of policies, how policies came to be. It's in a lot of these documents. That Housing Accelerated Playbook by the American Planning Association and National League of Cities is where a lot of the proposals for for Mayors Scott and Ryan Dorsey's proposals on housing in Baltimore City came from. But you'll also see the transit-oriented development policies in there. Just for greater understanding, I think it's a really important publication. The other thing is that the state did update the Maryland Housing Needs Assessment this year. For those of you who believe that this fight for affordable housing is about data, we've got more data, folks. It should be plenty. We've got updated data, so you can use it. You can use it for your area. You can use it for your for the population you serve. But it's all there. And it's really good analysis. The housing announcement, the governor's housing announcements from the summer of 2025, the state comptroller's report, the housing and the economy, why people are leaving the state, housing. And then the YouTube discussion is also there with the secretary and the comptroller. So those are just some things. I also just added this abundance book because many people within the comptroller's office and the Department of Housing and Community Development were reading abundance within the last year. If you haven't read it or you're unfamiliar with it, Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson, important book. So that's kind of the resources end of it. If there's any other information that you need, please let me know. We do also have a lot of excellent analysis available from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. We can get Maryland specific data if you're interested in that. They've made their analysts from the Urban Institute available to us as needed. So please, if there's anything that you need in terms of data that you'd like, please let me know. Happy to share it. But thank you also so much, everyone, today for being with us. And keep in touch. And we'll, hope to see you throughout the session.
Thank you.
All right, great. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.